Hello, welcome back to Season 1 of Snubs and Dubs, where we're talking the snubs and dubs of the 69th Academy Award for Best Picture. I'm your host, Kyle Tobiasson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jason Miller. Jason, what's going on?
Hello, Kyle.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm really good, too.
It's good.
It's a scary episode today.
Oh, boy.
Ooh, this is our Halloween episode, even though it's coming out on like the 25th,
I think. Yep.
As
Something
Halloween
like
as
that.
it gets, baby.
Well, it was like either that or have it come out on November 1st.
No, that's wrong.
And that was like,
this is the right call.
Yeah. But did you... Spooky. Did you watch anything else since we last spoke?
The Great Canadian Baking Show new season has started.
Oh, yeah.
And I have abandoned all other TV watching to get this season done.
Nice.
Because I love the Great Canadian Baking Show. It is beautiful, wholesome baking family fun.
Nice.
I already have picked out who I think is a champion.
Oh?
And season 3, episode 1, I nailed it. Out of the park, I chose the champion. I'm looking for the repeat here.
Oh, yeah.
My girlfriend chose clearly the wrong character. So
Character? Are they characters?
well, they're real people, but to me, they're just things for my enjoyment, entertainment. So
Yeah.
they're just little characters in this pond of a baking show.
All right, well, let's hear your hot take. Who's taking it?
Rafi Kat, going right to
Okay.
the top.
Is it a hot take or is it a hot bake?
Oh, that's good.
I've never watched any great nationality bake-off.
Oh.
Yeah.
They're so good.
I've
They're so lovely.
I've always loved cooking like programs, and so
Mhm.
I feel like I should watch some of that because it's all like where the hype's at. But
I will warn you, Kyle. You're gonna fall in love with them, and you're gonna
Okay.
be heartbroken when they have to leave at the end of every episode. But back to the spooky business.
Yeah.
What have you watched lately, Kyle?
Well, right after we finished our episode last time, when I said I watched the first 3 episodes of Squid Game,
Mhm.
I finished Squid Game that night.
That's how it always goes. Day 1, you dip your
Yep.
toes. Day 2, you go full on marathon swimming
6
in it.
hours straight of great Korean television, and it was good.
How did the squids do?
They definitely gamed.
They
a little
gamed.
bit.
I'm glad. Did you
Yeah.
choose the winning character from episode 1?
I mean, yes.
Well, okay.
I don't want to spoil it. Are you going to watch it?
Like eventually, I don't care about
Yeah.
spoilers, but I happen to feel like maybe some of the viewers will care about
Yeah.
spoilers.
I mean, like, it's one of these shows where it's almost like it's like the Hunger Games too, where like
Oh, there's
you
a main
know that
character.
Katniss
Okay.
is going to make it all the way.
Yeah.
It's the same thing here where like there's a main character that you're like, okay, they're going to get at least pretty far, if not all the
Mhm.
way. And it's just kind of about how they get there. That's really interesting. And yeah,
Cool.
I think it had a peak when
Mhm.
it was like, I think it was the second to last game was where I think it peaked for me. And after that, it was a little bit like the finale wasn't the biggest satisfying ending that I thought it might
Yeah.
be, but like it was still good. And I would recommend it
That's
to
good.
people.
Are they doing a season 2? Because I heard talk about something like that.
I feel like it would be hard to avoid given its popularity.
Yeah.
They left it open enough that it could have a season 2.
Mhm.
And so I think probably.
And
yeah.
piles of money are
Yeah.
going to be thrown at them for this. They will not be able to escape the giant stacks of dollar bills flying at their
Yeah.
heads.
I was actually also kind of continuing in the spooky season and I watched the 2018 version of Halloween, which is like a sequel.
Oh, I've watched that pretty recently too.
Yeah?
Well, it was last Halloween.
Oh, yeah,
Thinking
okay, well,
about
that's
this was over a year ago now.
relative.
But pretty recently in the grand
Yeah.
scheme of the universe and the heat death of
Well, because
said
the
universe.
new one's coming out. And I was like,
I kind of want to see that.
Yeah,
You going to see that?
I'll probably see that.
What do you think of this most recent Halloween?
It's okay.
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I
Nothing
like
wrong with it.
it's definitely a more modern Halloween, I would say.
Mhm.
Like it has like actiony bits and it has the scares designed in a way that I think is more tuned to or like a modern audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was pretty good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Looking forward to new Halloween.
Mhm. And I watched one more. I watched Scream 2.
Oh, you did?
I've started to kind of go through the rest of them. I think I'm going to watch the third one tonight too.
Is it worth watching the sequels? As someone who,
So
we'll get
far,
into this,
Yes.
loved Scream.
Yeah.
Okay.
So far, yes.
That's
I'd say,
good. Will it hold up all the way to what's about to be 5 / just Scream again?
Yeah. I don't know. That's what I'm like hoping to see.
Yeah.
But I guess they're all relatively okay sequels for like a horror sequel.
I mean, that's
So,
not bad. As
second
long as
one
they
was-
kind of hold up.
Yeah. Second one was good. Was it the
Huh.
best one? Was it as good as the first one? No, I think
It's
the first
never
one
gonna
is lightning
be.
in a bottle in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the first one then.
All right, that sounds about a good time as any.
All right. Of course, season 1 of Snubs and Dubs is covering the films from the year 1996. And so for episode 11, as we kind of alluded to, we're talking about Scream. So had you seen it before we started talking about this for this episode?
I'd seen it a couple times before.
Yeah.
It's a Halloween classic.
Yeah.
I love this. I mean, Scream's solid. We're not even there yet.
Yeah.
Scream's solid. Have you seen? No, you haven't seen this before.
I hadn't seen it before,
right.
but now I've watched it 3 times since starting because a little peek behind the curtain. We recorded our guest spot for this weeks ago.
Yeah.
Weeks ago. And so we rewatched it and we actually got the privilege to watch it in theaters.
Yeah, that was pretty
awesome.
wicked.
Yeah.
Had some local screening going on. So we went and watched it with an intimate gathering of like 10 other people, maybe.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
At like 10:25 p.m. and like reclining seats at the South Cinema. It was good stuff. I'm glad I was able to see it. Me too.
In theater, honestly.
Yeah. How long had it been since the last time you saw it?
Oh, not that long. I think I saw it like last Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
And then the time I watched it before that was like maybe a couple years before that.
Mhm.
But in the last like probably 3 or 4 years, I've watched it like 6 times now. But
yeah.
I also had to watch it so many times just for this episode. But I think I'd seen it at least 2 times before we started talking about that.
Yeah.
Spread over a short period of time too.
It does feel like one that I will want to return to.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like, obviously they're jumping ahead, but like this feels like a repeat Halloween type of movie. Like this is one that easily you can put on.
Kind of like Rocky Horror Picture Show, honestly.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite there, but in like a similar vein, and that you can throw this on any Halloween party and everyone's pretty happy.
For sure. But yeah, should we just get into it then? Get into the plot?
Let's just get into that plot.
Cool. If you were interested in Scream, I've included links to the physical media related to it in the show notes. If you buy it through that link, it'll help out the show. Or if you have any other Amazon shopping to do, follow the general link and help out our show in the process. Also, as I mentioned, we are going to be joined by another amazing guest during the discussion section of this episode. So look forward to that after our plot breakdown. A reminder that this is a spoiler-filled conversation, so if you have not seen Scream and you want to, go ahead and do so. It's on Amazon Prime. All of them are actually on Amazon Prime. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Dun, dun, dun.
A year after the murder of her mother, teenage girl Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, is terrorized by a new killer who targets the girl and her friends by using horror films as part of a deadly game. Scream is directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, and it stars Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott, Skeet Ulrich as Billy, Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers, David Arquette as Deputy Dewey, Rose McGowan as Tatum, Matthew Lillard as Stu, and Drew Barrymore as Casey. It has a runtime of 111 minutes, and it released in like holiday season, December 20th of 1996. So Jason, what did you think of Scream?
Oh, I love Scream. It's just such a solid like Halloween horror flick.
Yeah.
It's a good slasher. It's a good commentary on slashers.
Yeah.
It really, it did change the game when it came in. It spawned so many things to come after it that were not as good, which really is a testament to how good Scream was.
Yeah.
It's a top movie in my eyes.
Yeah.
How about you?
I really enjoyed it too.
Oh,
it was another one where I watched and I was like, how did I avoid this for so long? I think for me, I always associated it with it's like comedy ripoff, like Scary Movie.
Oh, Scary Movie,
and
yeah.
so for some reason, I like didn't see the appeal of watching Scream because I obviously knew it was some sort of parody. It's not like really a parody. It's more of a commentary. But I think I had that association, so I never went and like checked it out because those aren't really my jam.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I watched it, and I'm glad we went through it for this podcast.
Oh, hell yeah. Because it's more of like it's kind of a satire, but it's just really self-referential. And that it accepts that there's horror movie tropes while making a good horror movie. So
yeah.
It does really well in that way that you can kind of lean into the cheesiness because you know that you're being cheesy as hell.
Yeah, and that's the key point, that it's a good horror movie. Like you can easily make a satire like Scary Movie that's just making jokes and commenting on Scary Movie tropes, and it's just like whatever. But this has a good story and good characters and like fucking great writing.
Yeah.
And it makes a great horror movie within the commentary of other horror movies. So yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah, Scream.
Shit slaps.
It does.
It's a Scream.
It's a Scream, baby.
Do you want to jump into the plot then?
Yeah, let's jump into
the plot.
So we open with Casey Becker answering the phone to particularly flirty and dirty wrong caller, who is persistent in his attempts to anonymously chat with Casey on the phone. Some small talk about movies and popcorn and her current relationship status turned dark when the deep voice on the other end of the phone wants Casey to tell him her name so he can know who he's looking at. This results in another series of hang-ups and callbacks, building up to the voice screaming, "You hang up on me again and I'll get you like a fish, understand?"
That's pretty good.
Thank you. That wasn't the worst.
Yeah, no,
I'm practicing that one in the car the whole way here. At this point, you can assume the caller didn't really want to date. Casey is asked to look outside the patio doors, only to see her boyfriend Steve tied up by the pool. The caller crushes any remaining hope he may have left at getting a date with Casey by gatekeeping horror movies and quizzing her knowledge to see if she's a real fan. When she gets a question wrong about Crystal Lake's original killer, Steve gets the previously mentioned fish treatment. A short chase scene through the fog of a kitchen fire later, and Casey is caught, strung up, and turned inside out like the popcorn she ruined on the stove.
Yeah.
The real crime.
Great fucking start.
This is such a good start to the movie.
Yeah.
It has really good weight to it.
And like really good suspense.
Yeah.
And like there's enough like playfulness in like their conversation. Like Drew Barrymore fucking killed it
This
here.
is an incredible performance by Drew Barrymore.
And also like the guy who plays the guy on the phone, who is a totally different actor than any of the actors that, you know, are in this movie that would later revealed to be the killer. Like they also did really well over the phone. And the other actors never met the voice actor over the phone, but he was on the phone with them during the set, like during the shooting. And so like there was always that kind of communication happening and like active performance. And like, it really works.
And those two together get this pacing going fast. Within minutes, you're going from pretty innocent chat on the phone to actually being in like a suspenseful terror zone where like this girl is about to get murdered by some dude on the phone.
And there's something so great about how simple, like simply putting popcorn on the stove added to tension to it because like you're just like, I don't know about you, but I was watching her walk away. I was like, dude, that's going to burn.
Burn it. I mean, just move it.
Yeah, just like
there's cold burners to put it on.
Yeah. And it's just like that one extra step to like build your anxiety and your tension. And it's just, it really fucking works.
It's so good.
Yeah. Good start.
Good start. The next morning, news of the gruesome double homicide spreads around the high school where Casey and Steve studied, and deputies conduct interviews of any students who may have information about the young couple. This investigation includes Sidney Prescott, known for such accolades as sitting beside Casey in English. After school, Sidney calls her best friend Tatum to come keep her company, as her father had left for a business trip earlier that morning, and her mother had been savagely murdered nearly a year ago.
Nice. You just casually dropped that.
Tatum promises to be there by 7, and Sidney powers down for a delightful nap. She wakes up to a phone call from Tatum after 7 p.m., letting Sidney know that she is coming straight over as soon as she can after grabbing a movie from the store. Unfortunately for Sid, this brief pit stop to rent a movie showing Tom Cruise's Bulge would give the masked killer time to toy with Sid over the phone before jumping out of the closet and chasing her around the house. Sidney is able to save herself by fending off the killer with a door jam that buys her enough time for her boyfriend Billy to drop by the window. A door jam's part of the door. So it's a door jam. Door jam.
Very good.
Thank you. As Billy tries to console the terrified Sidney, a cell phone slips out of his pocket, and Sidney, fearing that Billy was the one who had made the spooky call, dashes outside to the awaiting police. Both Sidney and Billy are taken to the police station, Sidney to answer some questions and collect herself, and Billy to be arrested for attempting to kill his girlfriend, allegedly. At the station, the officers try to tie Billy's phone to the calls that were made to Sidney and Casey, while asking their chief suspect what he was doing at Sidney's house. Billy is held until they can receive the phone records, and once Sidney has finished being processed, she is escorted out the back by Tatum and Tatum's deputy sheriff brother, Dewey. Outside, the trio is ambushed by celebrity reporter Gail Weathers, famous for her coverage of Maureen Prescott, Sidney Mother's, death, and subsequent court case where Gail argued against the case built by Sidney that resulted in a man being sentenced to death. Sidney gives an equal coverage of Gail's face with her fist, and Dewey brings them both to his and Tatum's house to get some sleep. Or at least as much sleep as she can before the killer rings Tatum's house and threatens to kill her once more. I really love in this particular scene when Dewey answers the phone after this call and drops his voice to be like, hello?
And his face, like he gets all stern too.
Yeah.
I love Dewey.
This guy's just such a child.
Favorite.
Since nothing good ever happens to Sidney Prescott in this town, the next day at school, 2 jokesters dressed up as the killer run through the halls playing a prank on the student body. As Sid tries to remove herself from the cruel prank, she runs into Billy, who has been released from police custody upon their receipt of his clean phone records. Since nothing good ever continues to happen to Sidney, Billy tells her to get over her mother's death and have sex with him.
That's one way to put it. But that is exactly how he puts it.
That is the exact conversation.
Yeah.
Things someone who isn't a psycho killer often says to their terrified girlfriend who just escaped death. Sid then heads to the bathroom where two stereotype popular girls make conversation about how Sidney killed her mother and faked the attempt on her life for attention since, nothing good ever happens to Sidney Prescott in this town. Fortunately, her luck finally turns around when the masked ghoul bursts out of a stall in the woman's bathroom and once again tries to murder her. She escapes, and the school is indefinitely suspended until this whole situation gets resolved.
Can I cut in for a sec?
Absolutely.
So there's actually a scene that was cut here. And
really?
This is something that I put into the interesting facts, but I was intending on cutting in here.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, after the bathroom attack, there was supposed to be a scene in the script where Sidney bursts into the principal's office and reports the incident, crying for help. So this wasn't included, but it also explains why the principal ultimately decided to suspend class.
Yeah.
Because without this kind of knowing this happens, it kind of just cuts and then suddenly he suspends some kids for playing dress up, and then that's closes the whole school down, and then now there's a curfew. But because there was actually an attack, that kind of justifies it more.
Yeah, that makes sense. It didn't seem like a mistake not having that in.
No.
I kind of understood exactly what was going on anyways.
Yeah, you didn't need it, but it's an interesting fact. It's interesting to know.
If I could have wrapped that up a bit cleaner. But it worked.
Yeah.
To get her mind off these murder attempts, Sid and a merry bunch of high school students get invited to Stu's house for a big bash. The town must have passed a sick party loophole to the curfew mandate, as no one seems to bat an eye at dozens of teens getting drunk and staying out late at a private property outside of town during a murder spree.
Yeah.
Deputy Dewey even helps escort Sid to the shindig, where he brings his childhood crush Gail Weathers into the midst of the gathering, allowing her the cover she needs to plant a camera in the living room to gather juicy video in hopes that a series of brutal murders might happen at this party. The gaping hole where Gail's journalistic integrity is supposed to go begins to get rewarded as the killer has also come to the party, killing Tatum with a garage door dog guillotine.
Dog guillotine?
Doggy door guillotine? Dog guillotine?
It's good. I commend the effort.
I was really proud of that one, actually. As the party starts to wind down, Billy shows up to apologize to Sidney, leading to the make-up sex of Billy's dreams as the young couple sleep together for the first time. Billy is then immediately stabbed repeatedly by the killer, who has also come for Sidney in the bedroom. In the meantime, Dewey has invited Gail Weathers to go for a walk with him to check out a reported abandoned vehicle near the property. They get run off the road by a group of drunk kids racing to see their eviscerated principal, who is said to be hung on the football field uprights. Gail and Dewey share a kiss in the grass that is interrupted with the discovery of Mr. Prescott's vehicle, abandoned a few feet away from them. They race back to the house to find that the party abandoned, the front door wide open, and the vibes completely destroyed. Gail crashes the news van after nearly running over Sidney Prescott, desperately trying to escape the killer. Sid makes it back to the house after all of her plans of escape have failed, and she finds Dewey with a knife in his back, collapsing to the ground. Stu and Randy show up, pleading that each other are the killer and that Sid should save them and shoot the other person. She closes the door as a wounded Billy rolls down the stairs, revealing he was never murdered at all. It was a corn syrupy ruse. Randy gets shot by Billy, who now holds Dewey's gun, and Stu and Billy reveal their evil plan to a captured Sid. They were going to frame Sidney's dad for the whole thing after injuring themselves to appear innocent and have all the fun of mass murder with none of the consequences. Gail makes her triumphant return in time to distract the dithering duo, but forgetting to take the safety off the pistol, she is quickly neutralized by Billy, but still gives Sid enough time to escape, put on the Scream outfit, and hide in a closet waiting for her moment to strike. She runs Billy through with an umbrella, fights off Stu, and is saved by the third return of Gail Weathers and Randy, who use the power of their handgun to shoot the two murderers a lot. The movie wraps with Gail giving one last news report on the events of the night, and Sidney continues to never experience happiness or even one good moment in this godforsaken town. And that's the plot.
That's good. Good job. You did really well there.
Thank you.
So obviously we've mentioned that we like it a lot, but now we're going to cut to our conversation with our very special guest. We'll get to that right now.
All right, so Joining us for this discussion of Wes Craven's Scream is J. Blake Fichera, who is the author of Scored to Death, Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers, and its sequel, Scored to Death 2, More Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers, as well as the host of the accompanying podcast, Scored to Death. Blake, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today to speak about Scream.
Oh, my pleasure. I thank you for having me.
Oh, it is absolutely our pleasure as well. Just a pleasure all around. Well, I guess to start off our discussion on Scream, what are just some kind of standout moments to you from the film?
Well, of course, there's the opening. Just out of curiosity, like, how old are you guys?
We are just a little bit older than this movie.
Yeah.
By a couple months.
We narrowly beat it out.
All right. Just checking because
yeah.
I was a senior in high school when this came out. So.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of the perfect timing then.
Yeah. I was like the age of the characters in the movie, kind of. So it was, it was a big deal, this movie. I think there are some kind of misnomers about the movie in terms of like it being the first of its kind to be like super meta and all that. And there's other aspects of it, but I don't want to derail what you're trying to talk about.
No, that's totally cool. I'm actually really curious as to what like the moment was like when this movie came out, because we were literally infants.
Yeah.
So maybe just tell us a bit about like your first experience watching this movie.
Well, I saw it with my friends at the movies in the mall.
Nice.
And I just remember we went to see it, I think because of like word of mouth. Like, I think it had been starting to get around that it was like really cool and great and all that. They did a really interesting thing when they released it was, I believe they released it around Christmas.
Yeah, I was looking at the release date and that was confusing to me because it came out in December in the US and it didn't actually reach Canada until January of 1997.
Because I remember it was cold.
I would do it.
I was in upstate New York, so I wasn't as quite far north as you guys, but it was still pretty cold up there. And it just had like kind of gotten around, and me and my friends all decided to go see it. I think kind of the brilliant stroke of releasing it around Christmas was there was no competition for it, really. Christmas is a time for family movies, that kind of stuff. So it was like, what are you to put out a movie that was catering to like the teenager who was either off from high school for like Christmas vacation or back from college for Christmas vacation? I think it was kind of like a stroke of genius, whether this was their thinking or not, I don't know. But to put it out at a time when there's a bunch of teens that have nothing to do really other than hang out with their family. And they're probably not that excited to do that.
They'll probably go see this 3 times in a row just to have somewhere else to be.
I can't remember if I saw it in December or if it was January. Like, I don't remember specifically. I can remember going to see it. I can remember like where I sat in the theater with my friends. I talk about my relationship to horror in my podcasts and, when I do guest spots and stuff. But my relationship with horror goes back to like when I was a kid, but right around this time was when I started to get like really serious about horror. And a year after this is when I got like totally serious about horror. So, I had seen John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, which came out in like 93 or 94. So a couple years before that. And that's like what really sparked my love for horror and horror music, coincidentally, which would eventually lead to me writing, these 2 books like 20 years later from that. So I was kind of serious about horror. And I remember liking the movie when I saw it. But I remember when I got into film school, like a year later, I graduated spring of 97. So I went into college like fall of 97. So it really was like a year, like almost exact year later after I saw this movie. And, then I became a film snob, and I became even more specifically a horror snob because that was like my rebellion from Godard and Truffaut and everything that film school was trying to force down my throat, which I enjoyed. But I felt like I was championing horror because back then it was pre-social media. Horror wasn't as outwardly beloved as it is now. So I became a big horror snob. And during that time, I became very down on this movie. Because I was
it
like,
just the popular reaction to it?
Because I was like, and then shortly after that, Faculty came out, which Kevin Williamson also wrote. And that kind of was doing for that kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, sci-fi horror, what Scream was doing with the slasher movie. And I was just like, just because you're telling us you're ripping the things off doesn't mean it's okay.
It has to be a good satire. It can't just be satire.
And, but eventually, I grew up a little bit and I got a little less pretentious about a lot of things, including film and horror. And I came back around on Scream and I kind of recognize its importance and that it's great, for what it is and especially for what it did for horror. Because what I especially learned was people your age, maybe a little bit older, maybe a little bit younger, but like generations that are younger than me, this was very much a gateway movie for horror for them. So
because it is pretty safe in a way, like it's bloody, but it's not like horrible. You
definitely don't see a whole lot in terms of, I mean, you do see blood and you do see stuff, but it's definitely not overt. There's no nudity in it. But I also think because it was still semi-current by the time you were old enough to see it. You know what I mean? Like the production values were, it also helps that it was like a big, like a fairly large budget, like studio picture comparatively to something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or a lot of the 80s slasher movies. So I think the fact that there was money put into it helped it date less quickly. You know what I mean? Like it was a little more polished. So I think it was more accessible to a younger audience who was at the beginning of starting to, the internet was starting to become a big thing. I think the fact that it was polished and that it wasn't that old definitely helped make it more accessible to later generations or younger generations than me anyway. Because I've noticed on social media, especially girls seem to like this. Girl horror fans, female horror fans, I should say, they definitely seemed like this was the gateway drug to why they loved horror. They saw this, even though, it does follow a lot of the rules. Sidney Prescott as a quote unquote final girl in this movie is definitely stronger than a lot of the other final girls and a lot of the other slasher movies that came before it. So I think it was a little more female empowering, and I think they just kind of related to it. And so when I started to see a lot of young women really love this movie, I was very curious and I started asking people like, well, what is it? Like, what is it about this one? And most of them said, well, this was the first horror movie that I saw that really got me into horror. So if for no other reason, this movie is important for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think that its deconstruction of some of the earlier horror tropes will date this movie eventually? Because I've kind of noticed an evolution in horror nowadays. Like it doesn't rely on maybe some of the same sort of tropes that the earlier horror movies did, that this was deconstructing. Do you think that that's working against it in its place in history or its longevity?
Well, I think with horror, horror, I mean, certainly for a particular audience, I would say, like a non-horror fanatical, like the general film-going audience, perhaps.
Yeah.
But in terms of like horror fans are like a rare breed in that like horror fans want to make a horror movie. Mm-hmm. Not everybody who loves romantic comedies wants to go out and make one. I'm sure there are.
They'd love to live one, but
there are people that do. But I'd say like the vast majority of horror fans in somewhere, if you were to talk to them, you could get them to admit that they would love to make one. And I think there's just a certain passion about horror when it comes to horror fans. And so with that passion, I think there will always be a desire to look at the older films more so than other genres, I think.
I think that's very true, especially with how fans of the horror genre in general really love to go back to like the quintessential horror films. And it's like a rite of passage into the genre, watching Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th,
yeah,
Halloween.
Friday the 13th.
Like as soon as you get into that genre, that's your next stop is the real like the basics of it that really set the foundation for what it became.
Yeah, I just think like horror fans are always going to they're like a ravenous group. There's like a there's
never enough.
There's certainly like, when I started getting into it really hardcore when I was in college, the internet was around and there were message boards, but there wasn't social media as we know it today. There weren't streaming video network, like streaming video services. I think YouTube kind of existed, but that was still like really just mainly like people making stuff on their own. And it was still fairly new. So I'm of a generation, one of the last generations where like you really had to hunt for it. Like you had to
go to a video store and listen to their recommendation.
You had to go to video stores. But if you wanted like the real horror stuff, if you wanted to like the Italian stuff, you'd have to go to like a horror convention and you'd have to buy like a bootleg of a Japanese Laserdisc, like on a VHS. So it was like, there was like a thrill of the hunt thing, but that was like, that was part of it, and I think that still exists. It's just things are more accessible now. Like, I think there'll always be horror fans that want to look back at the monumental, the influential films. They just happen to have access to them. Whereas, previous generations really had to dig through mom and pop video stores, horror conventions. By the time the internet came around, there was a lot of like trading. It was like, you'd go on a message board and you'd like, I have this, and you'd make a dub and you'd trade it to and you'd send it to Italy for somebody to send you back like an Argento movie that you couldn't get here. So
now it's totally different. I was complaining to Jason that I had to watch it on Amazon Prime because the 4K Blu-ray wasn't out yet and I couldn't buy it before we watched it. So the access is there and people will find it.
Yeah.
You're kind of, I guess you're like an expert in horror scores, which is one of the reasons we wanted to have you on here. How would you say this one holds up in the realm of maybe first like Wes Craven movies and then horror movies in general? Because I was listening to it back just today and it even has some like resemblances to the Halloween soundtrack. So would you say that even the score is imitating some other horror movie tropes?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like after Psycho, in one way or another, a lot of scores are in some way doing something that Bernard Herrmann already did, whether it's intentional or not. It's just like the way Bernard Herrmann did stuff was just the right way to do it. So especially when you get to classical scores, like I definitely think like Marco Beltrami is a fantastic composer and he now, does like, Oscar award winning stuff as well as continues to do great horror movies. I don't think this, it's interesting thinking about it because I often have this kind of discussion with other people, it's like, were scores better then back in the old days than they are now? And this is, for me, this movie isn't back in the old days, for you guys it is, but for me, this is like a slightly more contemporary horror movie, but definitely in terms of, I would say execution, if for no other reason, but there's this thing about film music fans, not necessarily horror music fans, but film music fans tend to complain that a lot of scores in these days aren't very melodic, not very memorable, that it's quote unquote, not the style. Now you hear a lot when you're like discussing film music. And
that was a big complaint that Marvel movies have had, that their scores are completely unmemorable, except for maybe the Avengers theme now.
Yeah.
But like a lot of their scores are just pretty basic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I wonder, and it's something that I can't answer because I'm not young now. In terms of like, I'm not a kid growing up, these aren't my formative years. I wonder if because most of the people making these complaints are over 30, over 40 even. So I wonder if are they not memorable because we didn't hear them when we were 10? You know what I mean? Or are they really not memorable? So when it comes down to like a score like Scream, I cannot hum to you what the score is. Like I can remember
to it
emotionally how I felt in certain scenes because of the music. And that's mostly because since writing the books, I've become like hyper aware of the way music works in horror movies. Like, for instance, spoiler alert for people who have not seen Scream, but like the end of the first scene when Drew Barrymore is being murdered, like the music takes a very like tragic, emotional turn. Like the music's not playing the horror of what's happening in that scene, but it's playing the tragedy of what's happening in that scene, all the way up until like the mother's listening to it on the phone, and all the way until she goes outside, you know. But like it takes a very, and reason why that stands out to me is because it's not typical that the music would do that. There's another scene towards the front that always kind of stands out to me because it's when Sidney, she goes home, you know, I guess after the day of school, and she's gonna wait for like Rose McGowan to come pick her up, and she's at home, and it's before she falls asleep on the couch, and she goes into the closet. Now that scene, her going into the closet, the way it's shot and everything, there's nothing scary about that scene. But the music, in a way, kind of foreshadows that eventually when she goes to the front door, that Ghostface is going to come out of that closet, because the music kind of plays like, is she about to open the closet and there's going to be something there? Even though like the scene doesn't really call for it, but there was like a conscious decision there, obviously, to have the music kind of do that. And then later when it's night and she gets the phone call, that's where the killer ends up actually being. So like those kinds of things stick out to me, but I can't tell you like what it sounded like, you know, in terms of melodically or not.
Yeah.
The thing that I do find really interesting about the way music is used is when you get to the third act and they're watching Halloween and everything starts to happen, like John Carpenter's score, something that's diegetic, you know, the sound that's actually coming from the television ends up actually scoring a lot of that stuff. So you have John Carpenter's score coming out of the TV, but it's also scoring the scene for the audience that's watching the movie, which I think is a really interesting, genius way to play with sound design and music.
They do a lot of really cool things with sound design in this. That scene that you were just mentioning with the closet, when I was watching this the other night, just to rewatch it before discussing, I had to pause it and rewind because when that cue came on, I thought I missed something on screen and went back to see, like, is there something in the closet? Which, you know, in any other scenario, you can't really do that. But then, yeah, once you get that payoff that it's foreshadowing where the killer's actually calling her from, then it all kind of makes sense that it was just kind of like, not necessarily a red herring like some of the things are in the movie, but just foreshadowing where the killer was coming from. And I believe they do that again when Dewey asks that reporter to go for a walk with him later. They do the same thing where they give like kind of a spooky score when Dewey asks that when she steps out to kind of like add some possible drama to that.
Yeah. But, you know, had this been my first horror movie experience and like the movie that made me fall in love with horror, maybe the music would be much more memorable to me than it is. You know, to me, there are definitely like different kinds of scores. There's the scores that kind of stick out, like the John Williams score that will just be like seared onto your brain. Star Wars, Superman, Indiana Jones. There's even like horror movie scores like Jaws or something like Halloween, or even there's the from Friday the 13th. There's like little motifs that become almost cliche because they get used not just in the series themselves, but then become so recognizable that they become jokes. Like the Jaws theme, for instance. Or I always equate like, you know, other great examples of that are like Ennio Morricone's Good, Bad, the Ugly. That's something that's used for parody all the time because it's just so recognizable. And then like George Thorogood's Bad to the Bone is also like, like a huge recognizable thing that lived in horror, lived in Christine, John Carpenter's Christine, and then it got used like I think in Terminator 2, and it just became cliche. There's music like that, and then there's music that just works in the context of the movie. You know, music that does its job because ultimately music is there to fulfill a role in like the grand scheme of things. Like a composer is a member of a team and everybody's working together to make this thing work as well as it can. And so the music in a film is really not ever supposed to be listened to by itself. I mean, it was never
Yeah, not actively.
Yeah, it wasn't composed for that purpose. I mean, there are soundtracks and we do listen to them, especially if you're a fan. But the music has a role to play. And
yeah, it's just a motion machine.
Exactly.
Trying to get you to feel a certain way.
And one could argue that like the most successful scores are the ones that you won't remember because they're not getting in the way of anything. You know, they're just like they're fulfilling their job. It's like literally an invisible aspect of the filmmaking process. So like you could argue that like if you do hear it and you do remember it and it's too catchy, like it might be taking you out of the movie. So, and there's, you know, especially when you get to horror, there are scores that, for lack of a better term, most people would consider just noise. You know, they're not melodic. They're not even like musical in a traditional sense. But in the context of something like, I don't know, Insidious, it works. Like it's the perfect score for that because that, you know, it's fulfilling its job. But as much as I love Joseph Fichera and I've interviewed him for my books and there are scores of his and musical cues of his that I love and I can listen to. There's a lot of stuff that he does that like I'm not going to like put it on my record player or bring it up on my phone and just like listen to it for fun because, you know, it's scary. and it's not necessarily music in the traditional sense, but in the context of the movie,
opening your closet differently. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something you want to eat dinner to most nights.
Some people might, but not me personally.
Psychopaths, maybe.
But I love it in the context of the movie because it fucking works. Excuse my language.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Oh no, that's totally okay. Yep. So one fun thing about Marco Beltrami's score for this is that going into creating the score, he had never watched a horror movie before. So the entire first scene was created with him not knowing what really is used in a horror score. And I assume he kind of had time to do homework before finishing the rest of it, but he had one weekend to make the opening score for that scene with Drew Barrymore, and he had done that with no real first-hand knowledge of what a horror movie score sounds like.
Yeah.
So you get some really interesting usage, and it just it really works on building into the movie without being its own life outside of that, since that's kind of all he's working with at the moment for horror.
That might be why it's like Blake has said, it's more tragic in the end. It's not so much like scary because he didn't have any reference point before that.
He's not like playing the cliche of that scene. He's playing how he's emotionally responding to it.
And it creates such an interesting scene because no one really has that weight to someone dying, especially in the opening of a movie. It just kind of, people die, you're used to a high body count, then you move on to the next thing. But it's such an interesting usage of that scene to add that. And it just kind of possibly came from him not knowing that that's not what often happens there.
Yeah. I actually have a question, Blake, about your experience with this first scene, because Drew Barrymore was in like the center of the poster, and I think she was a pretty bankable star at that point. Was it shocking to you in the theater when you first saw that she died in the first scene?
I don't recall being shocked, but by that point I had seen like Psycho. You know, here's one of those misnomers that I was kind of getting into at the beginning of the of this discussion, is that there is like this thought that she was this like huge star at that point. And the truth is, like, she kind of wasn't. I mean, she was a big star when she was a kid because she was an E.T. and she did Firestarter and Cat's Eye. And she was like a kid. She was a child star. And she had, by the time she made this, she had kind of come back. She plays like almost a bit featured extra part in Batman Forever as like one of Tommy Lee Jones's like henchwomen. And they had made a couple of ensemble things. There was a female Western, which the name escapes me, that might have even been straight to video. She was acting again. She did have a career, but her biggest hits came after this, you know, and she might have gotten those movies because of the success of this movie. I mean, like Wedding Singer, the romantic comedies that she
Charlie's
does after.
Angels.
Yeah, well, that's even, you know, that's
that was 2000 actually.
Yeah, so like that's even further down the line, you know, when she's now like really like could carry a box office of a movie. But of course, to a generation of people my age, we remembered her because, you know, I saw E.T. in the theater, you know, as a kid. I was really little, but I remember going to see it. So she was definitely a recognizable face and name, but she wasn't like the draw for this movie, I don't think. You know, she originally, I guess, so the story goes, was she was going to play Sidney Prescott. She was going to play the lead. And then
I read that, yeah.
And then like a week or two or some short amount of time before they started shooting, she changed her mind and she said she wanted to play like the quote unquote Janet Leigh part, which is like the fake out. So I don't remember being shocked, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't. It was 25 years ago. So, but I do remember like, oh yeah, Drew Barrymore. She might even have been in Playboy by then. She did a Playboy spread at some point around that time. I can't remember if it was before this or after that, but no, but I'm sure there are plenty of people that were shocked by that because there are certain movies that just have great openings. For horror fans, like Suspiria is one of the first, the first 9 minutes of Suspiria, even though like the tagline was like the only thing scarier than the first 9 minutes of Suspiria or the last or like the rest of the movie, which but like they were playing up that like its opening was huge. I remember when I was in college, my friends, a buddy of mine, an old roommate of mine, and I rented a horror movie called Wishmaster. And the opening scene is just like this batshit crazy movie, and this opening scene. And then like the title comes up. And I remember pausing the movie and just turning to my buddy and saying, like, we should stop watching it now because there's no way this movie's living up to that opening. And it didn't. But
right.
It's a fantastic opening for a movie. And part of it, I think, is what we were talking about, the way Baltrami uses the music in it. I don't think, I don't think we can dismiss like the power of the music in that scene. It's just like everything comes together brilliantly in that opening sequence. And it's shocking. It's scary. It's sad. Like it's all kinds of emotions. And Drew Barrymore's really great in it. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that would argue that she's a limited actress, but I think she totally sells that scene for me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was actually really impressed with her in that moment because like she was really selling the fear.
Yeah. It's a fantastic opening. And I think that's one of the reasons why that movie made such a big splash at the time. The people there's, one of the misnomers that I was talking about, another one is that like there's looking back, people look back on Scream and be like, well, horror was dead. And then Scream came back and revived it. And that isn't like entirely true. There were interesting horror movies being made. The slasher genre was definitely kind of dead at that point. I mean, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, those movies were now in like the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 installment.
Yeah.
And so, I always kind of, when I talk about Scream, I always kind of point to like, in some ways, Scream was the inevitable next step in the evolution of what was going to happen with this kind of movie. Because when you get to, like Friday the 13th part 6 and 7, and then Jason Takes Manhattan, definitely the Freddy movies, there's only so much you could do. So what happens is those movies start to kind of parody themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on a very conscious level, like, even though, the characters in the movie might not be self-aware of horror or aware of horror, like definitely the filmmaking is aware of the previous installments. It's playing with it. It's playing things for laughs. So like in some ways, horror was kind of getting meta. Slasher movies were kind of getting meta by then. And that's not even to mention that like Fright Night in 1985 is a movie that's totally Scream, but with a vampire. It's like a vampire moves next door to this high school kid, and he and his friends his friend is a horror nerd. They have seen the vampire movies. They know the rules for vampires. They go to the host of the Saturday Night Creature Feature movies for help because he's supposed to be an expert because he hosts these things. So like in the supernatural world of horror, like Monsters and Monster Squad comes out in 87. That's another one where it's like they're playing by the rules of those monsters because they've seen the monster movies. So it was kind of inevitable that slasher movies become kind of more comedic and more self-aware, that eventually it would just become that. Like the audience would be the cast, the characters in the movie would just know the rules at some point. It just became, and because even Wes Craven's movie before this, I don't know if it's his direct movie before this or if there's one in between, but he does New Nightmare, which was him coming back to the Nightmare on Elm Street series. But that story takes a much more like heady psychological look at that kind of movie in terms of like how they're trying to execute like this meta aspect of it, like this awareness, because that movie's about like Wes Craven trying to make another Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and Heather Langenkamp, who plays Nancy in the first one, is playing Heather Langenkamp. So it's like everything seemed to be setting up. The table was being set for that, like the direction it was going to go. Somebody was going to make a movie like Scream. And so when it happened, the fact that the script was really great. The fact that Wes Craven, I think this might be his best directed movie. Everything came together. So it was like lightning in a bottle. It's like, this was the right movie at the right time.
Absolutely.
And so that's definitely one of the reasons why this movie has had such longevity and success.
I just want to ask one more question here before we wrap up. You had mentioned that this was something that you would kind of, before coming to light about, movie snobbery and whatnot that everyone goes through, you said that this wasn't something that you were super fond of, and you kind of came back to. What was it about Scream that brought you back, do you think?
I just think it was just like a personal, like I think when people are a certain age, certainly I can't talk for everybody, but I think there are certain people. And when you start getting into movies, there is a thing of like, sometimes you like a movie just because you think you're supposed to like a movie. And then you get older and you realize, you know what, like I never really liked that movie.
Or you don't like a movie because you think that you're not supposed to like it, or that it's just like
totally
not
like
highbrow cinema.
There's weird like peer pressures, whether it's your friends or just like the zeitgeist of the way the movie's perceived. There's just things that have an influence. And I think for me, not liking it, it was, in my mind, it was like being true to like the classics and not wasting my time with this new thing that's just trying to rip something off. And I think for me, it was more about like just maturing past that. And then starting to think about it and just like kind of realizing like, I should watch it again. And it was also just like, I'm one of those people that loves watching things about the making of a movie, maybe even more than I love watching movies,
More about the craft than the product.
Yeah. Like, so you start watching like things about the making of Scream, and you start to realize like, oh yeah, like he was trying to write a script that was like a John Hughes movie, but for horror. And it's like, okay, yeah, like I can see that. And so it's just like, I started to gain like an appreciation for what they were trying to do. And then starting to lower my defenses on what the movie actually was, and seeing like how successful they were at what they were trying to do. But also just with time, realizing that by that point, and I think this goes to another point of why like a younger audience, this was a great gateway drug for another audience, was because then you also had like 4 sequels or something that were spread out over 10 years or something after this.
And another one next year. So
yeah. So like the sequels, and I still, admittedly, I haven't seen any of the sequels since I saw them in the theaters. I haven't revisited any of the sequels yet, but I've seen this one several times. I did this when we were doing Saturday Night Movie Sleepovers podcast regularly. We did this like in the last year or the year before we kind of decided to take our break, but I had seen it before that. So, I mean, that's all I can really say is like, it was more of a personal thing, and it wasn't really so much about the movie itself as to why I came back around on it. It was more just like me dropping the pretentiousness and just kind of gaining an appreciation for what they did accomplish with it.
That's awesome. And I think that's a good place to cap the discussion. Blake, we've really appreciated you having on to discuss Scream. We've learned a lot, especially learning about the experience of kind of watching it when you were the target demographic to watch this movie, since we were just so late to this being the ages that we are.
Yeah.
Blake, before we all sign off though, where can people find you and your work?
Well, people can follow me and find out everything about what I'm up to on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Scored to Death. And the Scored to Death books, Scored to Death, Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers, and Scored to Death 2, More Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers, are available on Amazon, from other book retailers, or from me directly at scoredtodeath.com. At the moment of recording this, there is not an ebook version of Scored to Death 2, but hopefully by the time you guys post this, there will be. For some reason, there was a delay and nobody knew it until I brought it up. And I was like, you guys realize there's no Kindle version of this yet. And I'm like, oh, okay. So hopefully that'll be up soon. I occasionally, I don't do it regularly yet, but I do have Scored to Death, the podcast, where I consider it like kind of the continuing adventures of Scored to Death, where I interview composers in podcast form. And for the Cinematic Sound Radio Network, I've started doing a show called Scored to Death Radio, where I get to play kind of DJ for an hour. And I play horror movie cues, scores, themes, stuff like that. I'm just wrapping up a series where I did 3 episodes where I just kind of explored the music in Stephen King movies. And I'm not sure what's going to come next, but right now they seem to be themed that way. But we'll see if that continues. But if you enjoy listening to horror music, there's kind of an hour-long show where you can just listen to different horror movie cues.
And I will say, it's one of my favorite things to listen to at work right now, because you get a little bit of information, but it's just nice to have some movie score behind you while you work. It actually really helps me focus for some reason.
Yeah.
Why is it because you're on edge because of the horror music?
Yeah.
Like you're looking around your desk, like when something's going to pop out at you?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I try to, I try to give a little bit of information, but I figure the music is more important. So I try to keep my talking to a limit. I might throw in a fact here or there, but I really try to make it just about like packing as much music into that hour as I can.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll make sure to keep an eye out for the Scare ebook version of Scored to Death 2.
I'll of course leave all of your links in the show notes to this episode. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming on, Blake.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Well, that was great. That was
What
a
a
nice
great
little
interview.
chat.
Thank you so much, Blake, for joining us. That was a fun time. We learned a lot.
I did learn a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, Blake has a lot of cool information.
It was cool to see the perspective too. Like this was what with our conversation with Eric too, like the perspective of somebody who was there during the time, and especially in Blake's case, he was like the target demographic,
Oh, yeah,
It's really
exactly.
cool to see. But should we get into the reviews and wrap up section now of the movie?
Oh, I believe so.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think the general consensus was for the critics and the audience?
I gotta say that people loved it. I mean, it's still relevant to today. It's a good movie. I can't see reasons for people to really fault it. I'm going to say the critics are going to give it around like a 90 and an audience maybe like a 94.
Wow.
I might be a little bullish on this though.
Maybe projecting a little bit. The critics and audience actually have the same score of 79%.
Oh, wow.
So they agree, but it's maybe a little low.
That's a shame. They're all wrong then. No one's right on this except for us because we sufficiently loved it and they didn't.
Yeah. I mean, like I loved it about that much, I think.
Uh-oh.
We'll get that in a
No
second.
one's right but me.
All right. Well, it gets even wronger then because the IMDb score was a 7.3 and the Metacritic was an abysmal 75. Not 75, 65.
Oh no, that's way worse. If 75 was abysmal, I was about to really reevaluate a lot of things in my life.
I think the Metacritic audience reviews were like 89 or something though. So like that was pretty high. However, this is where it starts to get a little interesting. On a budget of $15 million, it made $173 million at the box office, landing it at 15th overall for the year of 1996. So
gangbusters.
Good
this is one of those horror movies that is low budget to make a huge return that is still enjoyable because they just print these now. They just turn on their crappy horror movie machine and print out something that can do those numbers.
Yeah.
But this is a good one.
I also did not feel the budget here.
No.
I thought it perfectly fit everything, like the aesthetic and the actors' performances. Like nothing felt like cut here, like cheaped out on.
Mhm.
Like it was, I mean, obviously the costume isn't very like special, but that's intentional. That's,
But that's
part
the
of the
point.
story.
They even say that you can get this in every 5 and dime in the city.
Yeah, it works. It all works.
It works
really well.
beautifully.
Yeah. I added a interesting fact into this part of it. The film was released in December, so we've talked about that. 5 days before Christmas. The studio did this because during the holiday season, family-friendly movies are usually released, and the studio wanted to give the horror movie audience something to see during a time where no horror movies would be out. So we actually kind of mentioned this in our conversation with Blake, but yes, this was an intentional decision.
And a good one, apparently.
Well, it opened at number 4.
Damn.
So it didn't open strongly. It opened with $6.4 million, which led the studio to believe that the film had flopped. However, the film's good word of mouth is what led to its success at the box office. With every week, it went up or stayed at the same place in the box office. By the end of its run, it ended up making $173 million. So
I bet you that was the effect, too, of students and adults off for school breaks and whatnot. Like, they were probably busy that first week. Yeah. But the second that Christmas area break is done, you got nothing else to do. Well, go watch a bunch of movies.
It was also probably a risky choice because people don't usually associate horror movies in Christmas time. And
That's
so
true.
Even though there was nothing for that audience, even that audience might have thought like, well, there's probably no horror movies out at the moment, or they're not really looking for it. And so, when it came out and it was great and people started spreading the word, like even Blake, he said he didn't watch it until like January.
Yeah.
And like, obviously it still has a reputation to this day. Like we saw it in the theaters.
Yeah.
Like it's still playing in theaters. And they're doing a reboot / sequel like next year. So yeah. Do you want to get into our rankings then?
Oh, I'm ready for that.
Enjoyment. Hit me.
Man, I think I'm going to do it. It's going to join the ranks of Fargo as getting a 5 for enjoyment from me. I love this movie, man. Good. It's so good.
That's great. I think I'm going to go 4.5, but still, I really enjoyed it.
I mean, that also joins your rank of Fargo as the highest rated that you have. You've also gave Fargo a 4.5 enjoyment. I gave it a 5.
You just enjoy movies more than me.
They're tracking. I just have the capacity to love, Kyle. Look it up.
Craft.
I want to give this one like a 3.5 or a 4. I'm kind of between those two because since it is such a low budget, they did so well with what they had, but a lot of it didn't need to be that crazy. Like the costumes were just like high school student today, so that doesn't need to be that crazy. So I think I am going to give it a 3.5. I want to leave a little bit room for movies that could go a bit bigger and do better.
That's totally fair.
But in that budget range, that's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, they did really well with what they were given. And I actually think there are some really cool shots in here too. And it doesn't feel traditional in a sense. Like even the score, like we talked about the score with Blake, but like, and you mentioned that this composer wasn't a horror movie composer or hadn't even seen horror movies before. But what they did was like, it was
amazing.
Yeah.
Which is also so cool, as we'd mentioned before, when you get cues that you would not expect in that movie at that time, just pop through and make it better.
Yeah. And so I think I'm actually gonna go 4.
Yeah. I think that's a good call.
It was really good.
I think that's a solid call to make.
Execution.
I mean, it all came through.
It really come through.
I can't think of anything that really dragged me out of it. Performances were as good as they needed to be.
Yeah.
Some even better than could be expected. Matthew Lillard really sold that with his absolute off-the-walls bonker performance.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a 4.
I'm going to give it a 4 too.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
4 the score.
This one, though, is probably also very high. Rewatchability.
5.
It's a 5. I'm also giving it a 5.
5 times, and I'm looking forward to 6.
Yeah, I'm also giving it a 5. Because I actually... Well, this is one that I want to show other people who haven't seen it, because I think you should see that. And I also want to see their reactions the first time, because watching it the first time is definitely different than watching it the second time.
Yeah.
Because watching the second time, when you know who the killers are, you see that they don't really shy away from pointing the finger at both Stu and at Billy. Like, obviously, Billy being a part of it is like, or being a suspect is like throughout the whole thing. But like, Randy correctly identifies both killers in the movie. Like early on when they're talking about it after Casey dies, Randy suspects Stu. And then it's not until like after Tatum is like, oh, like he was with me last night, that he's like, okay, well, whatever. And then obviously later he suspects Billy, even though he was arrested and got off. So yeah.
They do a great job of establishing a bunch of people who might have done it.
Mhm.
Like they do some things where it maybe looks like Dewey was related when he runs out of the room after the phone call's done to
Yeah.
Sidney. There's even that one scene when the guy steps down from the bathroom and you see his boots. It's the same boots as like the sheriff when they pan down to him. So
Yep.
they're like incriminate everyone. It's a really cool take on the whodunit where you're not supposed to solve it.
Mhm.
You can't possibly till the end.
No.
But they set it up where you're kind of questioning everyone.
Yeah. And that's like, as far as from what I've seen from the second movie so far, that's kind of like the theme throughout the rest of the movies is it's like, it's somebody that you know probably, or
Yeah.
like it's somebody trying to imitate what was done before and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's cool. It's a cool concept.
Absolutely.
And definitely worth rewatching again. So
Oh yeah.
hard 5.
Hard 5.
Give us the overall scores then.
All right. So I have given this a 17.5 altogether for an 88%.
Oh.
Kyle, you have given this a 17.5 altogether for an 88%.
Wow.
We just shifted some of the points around.
Yeah, so we totally agree. Yeah.
So I guess in my overall ranking, which I'll give a quick recap for right now, from top to bottom, it is Fargo, Lone Star, Independence Day, Jerry Maguire, Bottle Rocket, Train Spotting, Primal Fear, Twister, Happy Gilmore, and The People vs. Larry Flint. This is going number 2.
I kind of suspected it would go number 2.
This is absolutely going my number 2.
Yeah.
It's pretty close to Fargo, but the comedies hit better for me than, even though this was a funny, scary movie, like Fargo's comedy was just so on. Loved it.
Yeah.
But easy number 2, competing for number 1. I'm happy to put it there.
Cool. I am also happy to put it at number 2 because I was at the end, I knew this was at least top 5. And so I started comparing, and when it came down to it, I was like, would I rather watch Jerry Maguire or would I rather watch Scream?
Oh, it's
100% I would rather watch Scream.
It's Scream. It's not even close.
And then I was like, well, would I rather watch Fargo? Yeah.
Yeah,
Fargo's great. I
I
still like Fargo more, but so I think we're back to agreeing. It's number 2.
Yeah, well, this was such a strong, number 1, locked in. This is a locked in number 2. It's going to take a while to unseat this one.
I think so.
I'll just quickly recap where that puts your rankings for the season.
Sure.
From top to bottom, Fargo, Scream, Jerry Maguire, Independence Day, Bottle Rocket, Train Spotting, Twister, Primal Fear, The People vs. Larry Flint, Lone Star, Happy Gilmore.
Yeah. That all seems right to me.
Well, one mistake, but we can live with that.
Cool. Well, that'll do. Do you want to get into some funny Letterboxd reviews then?
I would love to.
All right. So this was actually, I mentioned this to you before the show, but because of how seen this movie is, there was a lot of Letterboxd reviews, and there was no way I was going to get through all of them.
Oh, I would never ask you to.
And usually I try to do a sweep of like the top 5 stars and then some of the half stars and see where the middle is. A lot of the lower end wasn't interesting. It was a lot of people being like, this is overrated, blah, 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 it's garbage. I'm like, okay.
You're garbage.
Okay, bud.
You're overrated.
And so I found what I thought were the best, and I got 5 here. So from Jay, he gives it 5 stars. Gail Weathers setting up her camera immediately after surviving a serial killer attack. Story time. I almost died. Brackets. No clickbait. Brackets. Gone wrong.
Really dedicated to the job, that
yeah,
Gail Weathers.
she is like the clickbait type though. It's like for sure. Sayuban says they give it 5 stars, and they quote, Sidney, I was literally just almost brutally murdered last night. Billy, haha, yeah, I don't know about that. That's so weird. 3 crying emojis. So anyways, more importantly, what are we?
I felt so bad for Sid in that scene because
right?
Billy's such a dick.
He's such a dick. He's just a horny dick. He's like, can we please just fuck?
Yeah.
You're so bummed out about your mom being brutally murdered. Jesus.
Enough about your dead mom. Come on.
Dawson gives it 4.5 stars, and he says, Billy really said, you've been acting like such a bitch since your mom died.
That's literally what he says.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable, Billy.
Lauren gives it 4 stars. She says, so here I am now going to break off with the horror movie obsessed guy I've been talking to. And finally, this is a lower end, 1 star by Mad. Such a shit movie. Just don't pick up the phone.
Yeah. Who would answer that call in today's day and age? Which I'm sure they answer that and scream.
Yeah, they'll probably figure that. I think they even meant that in the trailer too. It was like a text message. And they were like, pick up the phone or this is whatever. So
yeah.
Well, what do you think the Academy thought of it though?
I don't know if this got any Academy Awards. I can't think of it being nominated for anything, so I'm going to say it gets zilch.
I'm going to tell you, the Academy didn't think of Scream at all. It had no nominations at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it did get several nominations from a different Academy, the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films for the Saturn Awards. It was nominated for 6 awards and won 3.
Oh, yeah.
It was nominated for Best Horror Film, Best Actress for Neve Campbell, Best Writer for Kevin Williamson, Best Supporting Actor for Skeet Ulrich for Billy, Best Supporting Actress for Drew Barrymore for her one scene, and Best Director for Wes Craven. It won Best Writer for Kevin Williamson, Best Actress for Neve Campbell, and Best Horror Film of 1996.
Oh, yeah. All deserved.
Yeah.
I'm glad it got some love. It needed it.
That's not surprising. Does the lack of Academy Awards surprise you either?
No, and that's not because it didn't deserve awards. It just doesn't surprise me that they didn't give it any.
Yeah, it's even today, horror movies are criminally underseen by the Academy and underappreciated. Not fun. But I have a plethora of interesting facts. So should we just get right into those?
Lay them on.
Okay. So at around the 12-minute mark at the beginning of the movie, when Casey's parents come home and to find that something is wrong, her father tells her mother to go to the Mackenzies. This is the same thing that Laurie told Lindsay and Tommy to do in Halloween.
Oh.
Of which this movie contains many references of. So yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis told the other people to go to the Mackenzies.
The poor Mackenzies. They're just like a refuge for people being murdered by psychos.
The high school scenes were to be shot at Santa Rosa High School in California. However, very close to the shooting date, the school board read the script and denied the film to be shot there due to its violent nature, as they had been under the impression the film was a comedy. Production was then moved to Healdsburg, California. As payback, director Wes Craven put in the end credits of this film under the special thanks section, "No thanks whatsoever to the Santa Rosa School District Governing Board." So,
that's
little
that's
salty.
Good petty stuff.
Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but I'll clear it up in this cleanly written fun fact. Drew Barrymore and Neve Campbell never met Roger Jackson, who was the actor that played the voice of the killer, before shooting commenced. Whenever they were talking on the phone to the killer, they were actually talking to him. In fact, none of the cast met Roger. Craven thought that would be better to bring out the shock reactions he needed from everyone when they heard his voice.
Yeah,
So,
that's super cool.
Totally worked.
You also kind of pick up on that in the movie because when Billy and Stu talk through the voice box, it doesn't sound anything like the guy on the phone.
No, absolutely not. The use of caller ID increased more than 3-fold after the release of Scream. So, little effect onto the real world.
Damn, that really stopped those killers from making another 4 movies.
Scream was originally titled Scary Movie, which was then later used for a parody of this movie and other pop culture horror films in the Scary Movie franchise. The term Scary Movie is mentioned 5 times in this movie, in Scream. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, this is the last one. So, in a lot of these fun facts, they were lines that were ad-libbed by Matthew Lillard, who was apparently just hired on a whim because he was accompanying his then girlfriend to another audition, and the casting director just saw him hanging out there and asked him to audition, and obviously he got it. But these were all lines ad-libbed by Matthew Lillard. He ad-libbed his reaction to being hit by the phone, which was dropped by accident.
That's amazing.
So Skeet Ulrich accidentally hit him with the phone, and he was like, "Hit me with the phone,
dick," or something like that.
Yeah. He ad-libbed, "My mom and dad are going to be so mad at me." He ad-libbed, "I always had a thing for you, Sid." And Sydney then ad-libbed her response, "In your dreams." So a little back
sassy.
and forth.
I like it.
And then he also ad-libbed, "Houston, we have a problem." So Matthew Lillard absolutely going nuts in that final scene. He let loose. He
wasn't even, maybe he wasn't supposed to be there. And he's like, no, this is Matthew Lillard time. I'm also the killer. Screw you.
And so they clearly just let him fucking go for it in the end.
And it worked out really well.
Yeah.
But whatever character that Stu was supposed to be, Matthew Lillard took him over and created Matthew Lillard Stu.
Yeah.
So they might as well let him write his own lines at that point.
He was crazy. He's like sticking his tongue out all the time and just like frantic. He was great.
He was great.
I believed it.
And he's just such a lovable guy too.
Oh yeah. Well, you have any final thoughts on Scream?
It's great. I'm excited to watch this again next Halloween.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for listening to Season 1, Episode 11 of Snubs and Dubs. As always, you can find us everywhere on social media at Snubs and Dubs. That's on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Facebook, etc. We're also on Good Pod, so make sure to check us out there and join our official Discord. We'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on Scream or on this episode, so please send us a tweet or a message with a question, recommendation, or anything else. I'm also at Kyle Tobiasson on Twitter, and Jason is at Windy_Mills. Of course, all of those links are going to be in the show notes. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review. I would really appreciate it. You can do it in-app on Apple Podcasts, or you can give us one on Good Pods. So go there and leave us a 5-star review. If you write one out, we'll read it in this section of the show, and we would really appreciate it. Check back next week for another episode. Here is a sneak peek of the film we're going to talk about.
Do you think the jury should convict Carl E. Haley?
Objection! Turn him loose! Do you think they deserve to die, Mr. Haley? Answer the question.
Carl,
Did
don't
they
answer
deserve
that
to
question.
die?
Yes, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell.
That's right. Next episode, we're talking about A Time to Kill, and we are going to be joined by another special guest,
Evan McDonald's of the Kino Lefter podcast.
Right. I can't wait for you guys to hear it. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.